Two identical households were modeled in a 2025 report. Same income, same market. One bought, the other rented and invested the difference. 10 years later, the renters came out $53,000 wealthier. This is not a hypothetical dreamed up on the internet. It's from a real housing economics report. So how is that even possible when everyone's told you that renting is throwing money away? Here's the truth. The old rules of home buying don't apply anymore. Today, I'm showing you the exact math behind this and why it might not tell you the whole story. So let's start with the math itself, because it's actually pretty simple. The renting household paid less every month than the equivalent mortgage payment would have cost. Instead of spending that extra money, they invested it consistently every single month for 10 years. Combine that with the typical market returns over that period of time, and the numbers compound. Meanwhile, the homeowners were building equity too, just more slowly. And a lot of that equity was tied up in a single illiquid asset instead of a diversified investment account. Run those two paths side by side for a decade, and yes, on paper, the renters came out ahead. That part of the math checks out. But here's where I want to slow down, because this is the part that almost nobody talks about when this stat gets shared online. That $53,000 number depends entirely on one massive assumption, that the renter actually took the money that they saved and invested every single dollar of it every single month for 10 straight years without skipping, without dipping into it, without lifestyle creep eating into it along the way. In the real world, that is not what most people do. Most renters don't automatically funnel their savings into an investment account the way that this model assumes. Buying a home, on the other hand, forces a kind of savings discipline that a lot of people simply don't have on their own. Let's just be real. Every mortgage payment is a forced contribution to your own net worth, whether you feel disciplined that month or not. There's also something that this report doesn't fully capture: stability. Rent is not fixed. In most markets, it goes up year after year, sometimes significantly, and you have very little control over that. A fixed rate mortgage, though, on the other hand, locks in your housing payment for the life of the loan. 30 years from now, your mortgage payment on a fixed rate loan could be lower than a comparable rent payment in your same neighborhood, just because rent kept climbing and your payment didn't. Let's put a real number on that, because it's easy to gloss over. Imagine your rent today is $1,800 a month. If rent increases just 3% a year, which is actually modest by historical standards in a lot of markets, that same apartment costs you over $2,400 a month in 10 years and close to $4,300 a month in 30 years. Compare that to a homeowner who locked in a fixed payment a decade ago. Their payment has not moved at all. That gap is real money year after year, and it only grows the longer you rent. Then there is appreciation to consider. Home values don't move in a straight line, and nobody can predict them perfectly, but historically, real estate has appreciated over long time horizons, even accounting for downturns along the way. When you own, that appreciation builds on an asset that you control and you can eventually sell, borrow against, or pass on. When you rent, any appreciation in that property belongs entirely to your landlord, not to you. There are also tax advantages that this kind of pure math model tends to leave out. Depending on your situation, property taxes and other housing payments can be deductible, which effectively lowers the real cost of home ownership compared to what your monthly statement shows. It's not a massive factor for everyone, especially after recent changes to standard deduction limits, but it's still a piece of the puzzle that a simple rent versus buy spreadsheet often skips entirely. None of this that I'm saying cancels out what the report found. The math on the renting side is real, but a single stat, even an accurate one, is never the whole picture. And that's exactly the trap that most people fall into when they see a headline like $53,000 wealthier and stop reading there. And here's something worth knowing about this specific report. It was based on households in southeastern United States, and it was commissioned by a company that owns and operates rental properties. That doesn't automatically make the numbers wrong, but it does mean the people funding this research have a financial interest in you believing that renting is the smarter move. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how a lot of research in this industry gets funded. And it's worth knowing who's behind a stat before you build your life decisions around it. So where does that leave you? Honestly, it depends on your situation. And I know that's not an exciting answer, but it's a true one. If you're disciplined enough to actually invest the difference every single month and you value flexibility over stability, renting can absolutely make financial sense, especially in high-cost markets where the gap between renting and owning is large. But if you're someone who wants forced equity building, protection from rising housing costs, and a home that's actually yours at the end of 30 years instead of a rent receipt, buying still has real measurable value that a pure math model like this doesn't fully capture. The old advice of renting is always throwing your money away was too simple, but renting always builds more wealth is just as oversimplified in the other direction. The real answer isn't a slogan, it's your specific numbers in your specific market and your specific habits. Now, here's something worth thinking about before we go further, and it's the thing that actually determines which side of this math that you land on. Quick pause though, if you're finding this kind of breakdown helpful, hit the subscribe button because I go through stuff like this every single week. And if you're thinking about buying a house in any part of this country, I can connect you with an agent that I will personally vet. If you're here in Western New York or in the Buffalo area and you want to buy or sell, you can work directly with me and my team. The links to both are in the description below. Okay, so back to the thing that actually determines which side of the math that you land on. It's not your income, and it's not even really the market. It's your time horizon. If you're planning to stay in a home for less than 5 years, buying rarely makes financial sense. Once you factor in closing costs, agent commissions, and the slow start most amortization schedules give you on building equity. In that scenario, renting is almost always the smarter financial move. Full stop. But the longer your time horizon stretches, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, the math tends to shift in favor of owning, because that's exactly when fixed payments, appreciation, and forced equity really start to compound in your favor. So before you decide which side of this debate that you're on, ask yourself the one question that actually matters. How long do you realistically plan to stay? There's also a quick gut check worth knowing called the price to rent ratio. Take the price of a comparable home and divide it by the annual rent for a similar property. If that number is under about 15, buying tends to make more financial sense in that market. If it's above 20, renting often comes out ahead, even over a longer timeline. Anywhere in between, and it really does come down to your personal numbers, how long you're planning on staying, etc. That answer will tell you more than any report, any stat, or any argument on the internet ever could. If you want help running your actual numbers, not a generic model, but your real income, your real market, and your real timeline, that's exactly the kind of conversation I have with clients every single day. Reach out and let's figure out which side of this math you're really on. Thanks so much for watching.